My son-in-law gave me 48 hours to clear out of my own house. He didn't know it was my house. That's the part that still catches me sometimes, late at night when the neighborhood goes quiet and I'm sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee. He stood in the living room, my living room with my father's old armchair still in the corner, and told me I had 2 days. Said it like he was doing me a favor giving me that much. I didn't say a word. My daughter had been in the ground for 11 days. Her name was Patrice. She was 41 years old, and she had her mother's laugh, this big, rolling thing that started in her belly and took over whatever room she was in. Breast cancer. The aggressive kind that doesn't negotiate. From diagnosis to the end was 14 months. I was there for every one of them, her husband. I'll call him my son-in-law, because that's what he was, legally, for 9 years. His name was Donovan. Tall guy, worked in pharmaceutical sales, always had a reason why something wasn't his fault. I want to be careful here, because Patrice loved him. She chose him, and for a long time I told myself that was enough for me to keep my mouth shut. Now I think I was just too tired to pick the fight. What I can tell you is this. In 14 months of watching my daughter fight for her life, Donovan missed 31 of her oncology appointments. I know because I drove her to every single one he missed. I counted. I don't know why I counted exactly. Maybe I already knew I'd need to remember. The house is on Birchwood Lane in a suburb outside Columbus. 4 bedrooms, covered porch, a maple tree in the backyard that I planted when Patrice was 7 years old. I bought the house in 1999, paid $162,000 for it, spent the next decade and a half paying down the mortgage while I ran a small commercial electrical contracting business. Nothing fancy, 12 employees at our peak, mostly schools and office buildings. When Patrice and Donovan got married, she was already living in the house with me. Her mother had passed 3 years earlier, and it made sense. We got along. We had dinner together most nights. Donovan moved in after the wedding, and I carved out space for them. Gave them the whole upstairs. Converted the sunroom into a little sitting room for Patrice. I thought we'd figured something out that most families couldn't. I paid off the mortgage in 2018. The deed had always been in my name. Still is. I never told Donovan that. I know how that sounds. But here's what you have to understand. I never thought I'd need to. The arrangement was never formal. There was no rent, no lease, no paperwork. It was just family living together the way it was supposed to work. And Patrice knew the house was mine. She'd grown up in it. What I didn't know, what I didn't find out until after she passed, was that Donovan had somehow gotten it into his head that the house was in both their names. Maybe Patrice said something once and he heard what he wanted to hear. Maybe he just assumed. I genuinely don't know. But he believed it. He believed it completely. The morning after the funeral reception, I came downstairs to find him sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and a yellow legal pad covered in his handwriting. He looked up at me and said, very casually, like we were discussing the weather, "I've been thinking about the living situation." I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from him. I didn't say anything. "The house is going to feel different now," he said. "I think we both know that." I nodded. It was true. Everything felt different. The air felt different. "I've got some things I want to do with the space. Updates, you know. Make it feel more," he paused, "more mine." I looked at him. He didn't flinch. "I think it would be better," he said slowly, "if you found somewhere else to be, for both our sakes." I asked him what kind of timeline he was thinking. "A couple weeks? I don't want to be unreasonable." I remember looking out the kitchen window at that maple tree in the backyard. Patrice used to climb it. She broke her wrist falling out of it when she was 9. I took her to the emergency room, sat with her for 4 hours while they set the bone, and she cried the whole way home, not because of the pain, but because she thought she was in trouble. "Okay," I said to Donovan, and I got up and took my coffee upstairs. What he didn't know, what almost nobody knew, was that in 2019, the same year I paid off the house, I also sold the contracting business. I'd spent 23 years building it. I sold it to a regional firm out of Cleveland, spent $4 million. I kept a small investment portfolio, a rental property in Dayton I'd owned since my late 30s, and the house on Birchwood Lane. I was not a rich man in any flashy sense. I drove a 2017 Ram pickup and bought my jeans at Costco. I had never particularly wanted people to know what I had because, in my experience, what happens when people know what you have is that they start figuring out how to get some of it. I'd watched it happen to my own brother after our father passed. So I lived quietly. I helped Patrice and Donovan with groceries sometimes. Told them I was getting by on Social Security and a small pension from a union job I'd held briefly in my 30s. Donovan believed it. He had no reason not to. I want to be honest about one thing. I'm not sure I handled all of this perfectly. Patrice knew the truth, of course. We had talked about it more than once. She worried sometimes that I was isolating myself from Donovan by keeping him at a distance. Maybe she was right. Maybe if I'd been more open, things would have been different. But I also think about what Donovan was like in those 14 months. The appointments he skipped. The night Patrice called me from the hospital at 2 a.m. because she'd had a reaction to a new medication, and Donovan had turned his phone off. I drove 40 minutes in January sleet to sit with her in the ER. He showed up the next morning looking annoyed about being woken up early. You understand me, right? You understand why I kept quiet about what I had. After Donovan asked me to leave, I called my older sister in Asheville to talk it through. I didn't tell her about the house. I just told her what had happened and listened to her be furious on my behalf for about 20 minutes, which honestly helped. Then I called my attorney. Gwen, she'd handled my business sale, updated my estate documents after my wife passed, and been my lawyer for going on 15 years. She knew every detail of my financial situation. I told her what Donovan had said. There was a pause. Does he have any documentation claiming an ownership interest in the house? She asked. Not that I know of. Another pause. Do you want to correct his understanding now or later? I thought about it. I thought about Patrice in that hospital room. I thought about the legal pad on the kitchen table. Later, I said. How much later? When it's official, I said. The way Patrice wanted. Patrice had updated her will in the spring, about 4 months before she passed. She'd done it without telling Donovan. She sat down with Gwen and went through everything carefully. I know this because Gwen told me afterward, with Patrice's permission at the time, that my daughter had been thorough and deliberate and had asked very specific questions about what Donovan could and couldn't contest. The will named me as the primary beneficiary of her personal estate, her jewelry, her savings account, her car, everything that had actually been hers. Donovan received a modest bequest, the amount she'd felt was fair given the circumstances of their marriage in those final months, and Patrice had included a letter, a separate document, notarized, addressed to Donovan. Gwen had been instructed to read it aloud at the formal estate meeting. I didn't know exactly what was in the letter. Patrice hadn't shown it to me. She'd told me only that she'd said what she needed to say, and that she hoped it would make things clearer for everyone. I trusted her. I always trusted her. The estate meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the funeral, at Gwen's office downtown. It was a gray October day, the kind where the light never quite arrives. I got there early. Donovan came in about 5 minutes late, which felt like a Donovan thing to do. He brought someone with him. A friend of his, a guy I'd met once at a 4th of July cookout. He introduced him as moral support. I nodded. Donovan didn't look at me when he sat down. Gwen went through the procedural items first, methodically, the way she always does. She explained the document structure, confirmed that the will had been properly executed, verified the witnesses. Donovan sat with his arms crossed, looking impatient. Then she got to the house. She explained in plain language that the property at 1144 Birchwood Lane was not included in Patrice's estate because it had never been Patrice's property. It had been in my name since 1999 and remained in my name. There were no co-ownership clauses, no joint tenancy arrangements, no claims. Donovan uncrossed his arms. "I'm sorry," he said. "What?" Gwen repeated it. "That's not." He stopped, started again. "She'd told me." He stopped again. His friend put a hand on his arm. "The deed," Donovan said. He was looking at me now. "Show me the deed." Gwen had it ready. She placed it on the table and slid it toward him. I watched him look at it. I watched him look at my name, which had been on that document for 26 years. The color left his face slowly. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like a light being turned down. Then Gwen said, "There's also a letter from Patrice." Donovan looked up. She asked that I read it in its entirety. He nodded. I don't think he trusted himself to speak. Gwen unfolded 2 pages of my daughter's handwriting. She'd written it by hand, which surprised me, and began to read. I won't share all of it. That letter was Patrice's. But I'll tell you what she told him in essence, because she said it better than I ever could have. She told him she had loved him. Past tense, but honest. She told him she had spent the last year watching him make choices that revealed his character, and that she had grieved that revelation almost as much as she had grieved her own diagnosis. She told him that the house had always been her father's, that she had known this her whole life and had chosen not to correct his assumption because she had not wanted conflict while she was dying. And she was sorry for that, because it hadn't been fair to anyone. She told him that her father had driven her to 31 doctor's appointments. She had counted 2, apparently. She told him that she hoped he would find a way to live with more integrity than he had shown in the past year. That she meant that sincerely. That she would not have married him if she hadn't believed he was capable of it. And then she said, and this is the part I've thought about most. She said, "The house was never something I could give you, Donovan. It was never mine to give, but if you had been the man I thought you were, my father would have offered it to you himself. Think about that." Gwen folded the letter. The room was very quiet. Donovan's friend said quietly, "We should go." Donovan stood up. He straightened his jacket. He looked at me one more time, and I could see him working through something. Anger, probably, and embarrassment, and something else underneath that I didn't have a name for. Then he left. I sat in Gwen's office for a while after. She brought me a cup of coffee and we talked through the next steps, the rental property in Dayton, some trust adjustments I'd been meaning to make, a few other things. Practical things. It helped. When I got home, I walked through the house slowly. I stood in the doorway of the room that had been Patrice's when she was a teenager. The one with the window seat she'd begged me to build when she was 12. I'd made a mess of it the first time, took it apart and redid it over a long weekend, while she supervised from the doorway with a very specific vision and very little patience. It still sits right, all these years later. I went out to the back porch and looked at the maple tree. The leaves were turning. Another week, and they'd start coming down. I thought about what Patrice had said in that letter. The man, I would have offered it to myself. I thought about what that meant. About the kind of choices that close doors before you even realize they're closing. I'm not a person who celebrates when someone else loses. That's not what this is. Donovan left with less than he came in with, and part of that is his own doing, and part of it might be mine, and some of it is just the way things unfold when people don't tell each other the truth soon enough. What I know is this. I'm still in the house on Birchwood Lane. My father's armchair is still in the corner of the living room. The maple tree is still in the backyard, and last weekend my son drove up from Cincinnati with his kids. Patrice's niece and nephew, 7 and 9 years old, and they played in that backyard all afternoon. The 9-year-old found the old rope we'd tied to the maple branch years ago, frayed down to almost nothing, and asked me if we could fix it. I told her we absolutely could. We went to the hardware store together, her and me, and we picked out a good thick rope, the kind that'll last. We came home, and I climbed up there and replaced it myself, which took longer than it used to and required a stepladder I wouldn't have needed 20 years ago. But it holds. I made sure it holds. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened in that estate meeting room, not the legal part. That was simple. One document. My name on it for 26 years. I mean the human part. The part where a man realizes the story he'd been telling himself was never true. Donovan didn't lose the house that afternoon. He never had it. What he lost was something different. The version of himself that believed he could treat people carelessly and still come out ahead. That's a harder thing to lose than a property. You can find another house. It's not as easy to find your way back from who you showed yourself to be. I think about that a lot. Not with satisfaction. I want to be clear about that. Watching someone's certainty collapse in real time isn't something I'd wish on anybody. But I do think about what caused it, and what caused it wasn't some sudden reversal of fortune. It was a slow accumulation of choices Donovan made over 9 years, and especially over 14 months, when the choices were hardest and mattered most. Every appointment he skipped, every phone he turned off, every morning he showed up annoyed instead of grateful that Patrice was still there to be annoyed at. None of that was invisible. It all went somewhere. I'm not a man who believes in tallying. My father raised me to do what needed doing and not keep score. But I do believe that how we treat people in their worst moments is the truest thing about us. Not our intentions. Not what we mean to do when things get easier. What we actually do at 2 in the morning in January when someone we promised to love needs us, and it's inconvenient. Patrice knew that. She'd figured it out long before I had. That letter she left. 2 pages of her handwriting, methodical and honest. That wasn't anger. She wasn't trying to punish him. She was trying to tell him something true, in the only way she had left. That took a kind of strength I don't think I fully understood, until Gwen read it out loud, and I sat there listening to my daughter's voice coming out of 2 pieces of paper. What I've come to believe, at this point in my life, is that real integrity isn't the absence of struggle. It's what you do with the struggle when no one's grading you. Donovan had 9 years and 14 months of chances to be the man Patrice thought she'd married. He made different choices. Those choices had weight. They always do. And I think about the maple tree, the rope my granddaughter and I replaced together, her asking careful questions while I climbed a stepladder I wouldn't have needed at 40. There's something in that. Not a lesson exactly, more like a reminder. The things worth keeping require tending: a tree, a house, a relationship, a reputation. You either show up for them consistently or you don't. And eventually, what you've shown up for is what remains. I'm still in the house on Birchwood Lane. I tend what's mine. That's enough.